Hello, and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm doing the philosophy of reading tag, which was created by Brandon at Brandon's Bookshelf. I was tagged in this by Tom L.A. Books, who's doing a wonderful series of 100 videos about Dante's Divine Comedy. And just a reminder, if you're doing the 100 Days of Dante with Baylor College in conjunction with several other schools, we just recently started Purgatorio, but I'm waiting a little while, so I'm a bit behind because I'm awaiting the Derling Martinez translation of Purgatorio in the mail, and I'd like to continue through with the same translation for all of them. And if you're new to my channel and just watching because of the tag, welcome. I do a lot of serious like classic literature booktube type stuff, and I also do authortube. I'm an indie author of historical fiction, and occasionally I will also do topics on other things, like for example classic film, music, and a little bit about body piercing and such like that. But mostly it's booktube and authortube. So let's get into it. So I wrote up my answers to this during NaNoWriMo, and I counted them towards my 50K goal as creative nonfiction. If not for Crown and Creative Nonfiction, I would never have made it to the end, unfortunately, but that's a whole topic for another vlog. But I did fortunately get 50K this year. So number one, what's most important, a good character, plot, or message? I love a good story, but even an amazing, exciting, engrossing story is nothing without great characters. Strong, important messages make a book even better. They're all intertwined. Number two, should one read books about ideas or opinions they disagree with? As it says in Pirkei Avot, a 6-chapter book of the Talmud, who is wise? One who learns from everyone. And this, if you don't know, it's a very popular book in the Talmud. Most, well, at least Orthodox prayer books have them. I think like old school conservative might also, and it's customary to study a little bit of Pirkei Avot on each Shabbat between Pesach and Rosh Hashanah, just like 6 short little chapters full of wonderful maxims. And this is at the start of chapter 4, talking about who is wise. And also, Ben Zoma said, who is wise? He who learns from every person, as it is stated. From all those who have taught me, I have gained wisdom. Indeed, your, God's, testimonies are my conversation. And there's also lots of wonderful maxims like that, and just many other things along the same line. So we should always strive to learn from everybody, even people we might not have like religious or political or philosophical or whatever views in common with, because otherwise how can we become a good world citizen? I cannot understand the mindset of so many people in the younger generations who've convinced themselves they need to exist in a sealed echo chamber, and that only the opinions on the latest approved woke checklist are correct, which unfortunately my little brother is like that too. He kind of disowned me because we disagree about some very important things, and he's just like caught up in this like clownery, in my opinion, but that's also a subject for another post. If a book is written well, one can at least try to understand the author's thought process, not just dismiss him or her out of hand as a hopeless bigot who needs to be burnt at the stake, or be bullied into pulling a book from its publication schedule, or issued a creepy scripted apology that sounds like it came from a struggle session. I wrote on my blog about this, Blood Air by Amelie Wen Zhao, A Place for Wolves by Kosoko Jackson, and The Cape Doctor, I believe that's by E.J. Levy, I think her name might be, but that's just like really weird. These people, like, they don't even read the book, they just hear something and immediately react, or they read like an ARC reviewer, someone who is like reading the book in advance of its actual publication and accused of something and taken totally out of context and intent, or projecting their own views onto it, and they just like go after this person with flaming pitchforks. It's really like very unfortunate, and I don't understand what like drives these people to think like that. Good world citizens aren't afraid of learning about how other people live. And if you think reading about a different religion or political philosophy or newly unearthed scholarship about the subject will destroy your own beliefs, you have a very weak faith. Number 3. As tech advances, what do you think will be the role of books? We'll probably see more ebooks and other non-traditional ways of reading, but I don't believe paper books will ever entirely go away. Even if they become rarer, there might be a mass resurgence of rediscovery and popularity in future generations, just as people during the Renaissance brought so many long-lost classic books back from the mists of obscurity. The first Isaac Asimov story I ever read, which I finally tracked down the title of, was The Fun They Had. The children in this story, set in the year 2155, are taught at home with mechanical teachers. When they find a real book in the attic, they're not quite sure what it is, since they've never seen a book before. But 11-year-old Margie does remember the stories her grandpap used to tell about what life was like before technology, and eventually realizes how fun life must have been before everything was so mechanized. Number 4. How important are summaries, reviews, and art in your book choosing? I don't like to read reviews with spoilers, but I do appreciate honest and detailed reviews and summaries. But obviously, like some reviews are just like weird and stupid. I skip them with these, like giant gifs and images. Why do I need stupid gifs picking up your review? Just tell me what the book is about. I don't need to be distracted with all this other stuff. I usually read the 1, 2, and 3-star reviews first, since they're often more honest than the highest reviews. I obviously discount childish negative reviews from people ranting about how they were forced to read it in school. I mean, like, why are you even giving your opinion? That's not even a review. It's just, oh, I don't like reading. I have a short attention span. My English teacher made us overanalyze this, and now I'm going to bash it because I can't understand good literature. Many committed fans of an author or genre can say nothing bad about their loves, and often don't even give real reasons for why a book is awesome, or an album, or a movie. They're just mindless, sycophantic praise. Obviously, there are many wonderful 4 and 5-star reviews, but they're the ones written with originality and honesty instead of silly lines like, "Name is the best author ever, and anyone who disagrees is a terrible person with no taste." It's also harder for hardcore fans of an author, band, or actor to be honest about less than great work, since they seem to feel that makes them bad fans for not worshipping everything that person ever did. Your favorite writers deserve better than constant mindless praise, even when they've clearly put out a very weak book. And when I write my reviews for books, albums, and films, I always try to keep in mind that the people reading it aren't all serious fans who've been following this writer or band or actor, whoever, for like 10, 20 years. When I wrote my reviews on the album review section of the Who.net, which unfortunately is now only in archive.org, I was kind of writing for the new fans because all the reviews I had read like prior to that were based on the premise that everyone reading that loved the band already and had these albums. They were just like recycling things. So I wrote them like, oh, this might be not so good for a new fan because I got this fairly early in my journey with the band, and it almost turned me off because it wasn't just good for a new fan. And now this is like perfect for a new fan. Or maybe save this for one of the last albums you get. Don't just like arrogantly assume everyone reading this is automatically a fan of the book or the band or whoever, because it's just kind of stupid, and you might be turning off someone or making them have a big mistake, or they get the wrong book first, when you could just be like pointing them towards, oh, this is the best thing for a newbie, or if you're just not sure about this author yet, just try this out first and save this for last. But I just wish, unfortunately, many people just don't do that like that. As for cover art, I most prefer old-fashioned artwork, abstract art, and fancy calligraphy over modern graphic design, with unoriginal stock images and boring typefaces. When I see a supremely overused cover style like the headless character, I roll my eyes. The headless, hairless, bare chest on a romance novel automatically makes me assume it's derivative and not very good. I also dislike close-ups of mouths and crotches and the almost kissing. I mean, it should tell you something. Even actual like erotic novels don't have crotch close-ups on the cover. Like, check out Sweet Arrow Swimming. That's the creepiest, worst example of this trend I can think of. It's just so gross and vulgar, even for a book which I'm told is pretty lurid on purpose. So that's just something you want to stay away with if you're thinking about being an original writer with like advertising your book. This is like good content inside. Don't make people pass it up and skip it just because they're thinking, oh wow, another headless character. That's not going to be very good. Amateur artwork is never good, particularly on an indie book, because you're trying so hard to sell yourself to people who might not be aware of you, and you don't have the backing of Big Five publishing behind you for promotion and marketing. I learned a big lesson from drawing the original covers of 2 of my own books, which have long since been replaced by proper professional cover art, and I possibly will have a vlog about that as well, the cover images I've chosen for my books and the evolution of the ones that have been replaced. While I really enjoyed making those pictures, particularly since I'd never drawn human figures so well before, they weren't good advertisements for the stories within the pages. Number 5. Should one ever skim or scan a book? I confess I had to do this with some of the books I read in my YA literature class, since I didn't like them at all, and I just couldn't get into the stories. I skimmed them and read detailed reviews online to be able to produce convincing papers. And I obviously don't recommend that you should read a book all the way through if you have to do it for a class, but sometimes you just can't help yourself and have to cheat a little bit. When you know you're just not clicking with a book, but still need to be familiar with it for the purposes of a book club discussion, a class paper, research, or the like, skimming can be more effective and less frustrating. Number 6. Should reading always be enjoyable? As aforementioned, sometimes we have to read a book not because we want to, but because we have to, or at least are expected to. Or we might read a popular or classic novel just to say we've read it, or see what all the fuss is about, but don't enjoy it. Real life isn't about only doing what we like and what feels good all the time. Number 7. Is it important to be well read? I believe everyone in an ideal world should be literate and familiar with classics of world literature, since it helps to make us good world citizens and to recognize references to famous books and films, TV shows, plays, cartoons, songs, video games, and other books. However, many people are unable to be well read because they haven't any class privilege or live in parts of the world where it's impossible to get the kind of education many bourgeois people in the West take for granted. The majority of people in my family tree over the last 200 years or so have been working class and poor and thus had more pressing priorities than reading. Prior to like 200 years ago, I had very illustrious ancestors, at least on my father's side. It's a topic for another vlog, obviously, but I am the direct descendant of 6 that I know of medieval monarchies, so that's like a really interesting thing I'd like to discuss possibly more in future. My paternal grandpap left school after 8th grade, yet he loved reading Western novels, and did the crossword puzzle every day. Not all people who enjoy reading manifest it in the same way. Number 8. What is your book buying process? I tend to read more books from the library these days, and buy most of my books from used bookstores instead of getting them brand new. In the past, I bought many books from Alibris, both used and new, more than from Amazon or physical stores. I have books and authors in mind to look for, mostly classics and some serious historical fiction. For used books, I like them to be in as good of a condition as possible, like, for example, no suspicious stains on the cover, excessive writings on the pages by the previous owner, or bent back corners on the cover. Number 9. What is your reading process? I can't think of any special process I use, though if I'm reading something that requires more care and thought, like, for example, an epic poem like the Aeneid or one of Shakespeare's plays, I'll read slower, pay attention to the footnotes and supplementary material, and do outside study instead of just powering through a reading for fun, because unfortunately you can miss a lot of really important things when you just like power read through and don't pay attention to what's actually going on. And this is something you have to learn to do. Obviously, it generally doesn't come all at once for most people, and it's a bit trial and error usually. Number 10. How do you use what you read? If a book is meaningful enough, I'll use lines inspired by it, or drawn from it in my own books, or make thematic references or comparisons, or maybe have a storyline influenced by something in the other book, and that's also something I'd like to discuss in future vlog posts, how I like use things that inspire me in some other people's books and my own books in life. Number 11. If you could download a book to your brain, would you still read? I know Canto 1 of Inferno and the first 45 lines of Canto 2 by heart in the original Italian, and I know a number of Decameron stories almost by heart. One night at my writing group back home in Albany, New York, I told my friends the 10th story of the 3rd day to great laughter and enjoyment. However, reading words on a page is very different, more personal experience than recalling them in my mind or reciting them. It kind of like viscerally connects you to the author, particularly if it's an old book. It connects me like I said, it connects me more deeply to the authors. And just once I get like a significant number of subscribers and like views on my blogs, I will be doing a 105, I'm thinking, series of videos on the Decameron, which is one of my all-time favoriteest books. I've loved it since I was 22 years old. I first heard a story from it in my sophomore year of high school. A girl was doing a presentation on it, so I'm really looking forward to that. Hopefully when I have a lot more like people actually engaging with my videos and I don't just feel like I'm talking to myself. And number 12. What are your views on rereading a book? Some books are like old friends, going on the journey through life with us, and meaning something different at each stage of our lives. Sometimes a book also seems awesome when we're younger, but doesn't hold up to an adult rereading, like, for me, Lois Lenski's Strawberry Girl, Patricia Clapp's Constance, A Story of Early Plymouth, and Carolyn Haywood's B is for Betsy. On the flip side, some books we didn't like when we were younger seem much better, suddenly make sense when we're adults. Like maybe if you really hated a book in your English or foreign language class, you were like forced to read. Suddenly when you're like 30 years old, oh wow, this is so much better. I can't believe I hated it back then. And I wish more people would give these books a second chance instead of just dismissing them forever because, oh, my English teacher didn't do it well. Other times we have a hard time warming to a book or series because we heard lots of high praise, and the book failed to blow us away like we expected. This was one of the reasons it took me so long to fully warm to the Betsy Tacy series, and why I'm planning to reread it after I finally find the last book, Betsy's Wedding. I might possibly have to buy it because it's kind of like a high price on Amazon, but it's not really in the libraries. But I don't mind it. I actually did buy the first four books from Black Friday. I have some of the other books, the spin-off books, and two of the other books in between. So I'm looking forward to rereading these books. Although, as I've mentioned in my blog and other vlogs, there are still some things I don't think will go like well for me, because obviously I didn't come to these books when I was a child, so these characters aren't my old friends like a lot of these people. And there was like so much high praise. Like one of the women writing the forwards compared the series to Jane Austen and Charles Dickens. So, and that's really high praise it didn't really live up to for me. And I don't really like connect to Betsy, like no matter how many times I might reread it, I just can't relate to someone who cared all about popularity and social life and dating in high school instead of like reading and studying and keeping to herself. And she does have a lot of like upper middle class privilege, which also is something I can't connect to. But I am looking forward to rereading these books later, and hopefully they might come across better for me now that I've already had the disappointing experience of them not living up to the hype. And I admit I may have been too harsh in the reviews I originally wrote and the ratings I gave, since I was expecting perfection and to instantly feel like the characters were my friends. The second time around, hopefully, will be a better experience. Still, other times we like a book the first time we read it, but we didn't have enough life experience or literary sophistication to appreciate or understand it on a deep personal level. Number 13. What makes a book good? Strong writing, compelling story, interesting characters, original concept, a setting and or topic I like. It's a book I can climb into and live in for a few weeks while I go on the journey through life with the characters. A book I remember in vivid, hilarious, or haunting detail years later. A book that makes me think. A book that gives me goosebumps. A book that moves me to tears. A book that inspires me to want to learn more about that time period, culture, city, country, or topic. It inspires a lifelong love for it. A book that makes me change my mind about something. A book that makes me feel as if I'm right there with the characters. A book that reminds me of things and people from my own life. A book that challenges me. The right book can also make the writer feel like a dear personal friend, not just a favorite writer, someone I admire and would love to spend time talking with in the other world, or a literary idol. Number 14. What makes a book bad? Gimmicks is a big one for me. For example, a first-person narrator who's not the protagonist and always needs an awkward, convenient, and plausible reason to know about everything going on in the protagonist's life. I mean, this can be done well, like, for example, in the Sherlock Holmes stories, or a book about a queen narrated by her chambermaid, or a psychological thriller narrated by the stalker and talking about his intended victim. But most of the other times it just feels so stupid and gimmicky. And believe me, I did try this myself once, and I scrapped it and went back to my tried and true third person omniscient when I went back to start the book again. But although I did keep in like little scraps of newspaper stories and such to convey things going on outside of the main stuff, but other than that, it was all like focused on my main character in the classic third person omniscient. And another one, the revelation that everything was just a dream or fantasy. That's just really stupid and kind of makes me angry. Like, this isn't a book, but when I think back all these years later on the series finale of Roseanne, she's just saying, oh, the last season, it was just like a fantasy I created for a book, and all these horrible things really happened instead. That's just like horrible. It's like giving the finger to your longtime fans who believe this was really happening. I also don't like nonlinear narratives that just jump all over the place without structure. They move one character backwards while moving another forward. Now, I'm told this is like fairly common in a lot of Asian fiction, nonlinear formats. For example, Bao Nin's The Sorrow of War, which is about the Vietnam War, which we read in when my English class in community college. But other than that, it seems like a terrible gimmick, unless, like, for example, the meat of the story is a flashback, or there are significant parts of the story which are more than just long flashbacks, but integral parts of the narrative. Like, for example, Leanne Uris's Exodus, which I am long overdue to reread. And for example, like, someone in the present is solving a mystery from the past, but other than that, it's just like a terrible gimmick. I would advise you not to do it if you're a writer. And another one I hate: alternating point of view chapters instead of the classic third person omniscient. It's like these people basically might as well admit, I have no idea how to like handle an ensemble cast and do third person omniscient, or I think third person omniscient is stupid and like God mode or whatever, and just these like, or it's you can't do third person omniscient unless you're like constantly head hopping in every single other sense. I just wish more younger, newer writers today would, learn there's nothing to be afraid of with third person. That's like the classic, like standard traditional default for a reason. I also don't like ridiculous Deus Ex Machina plot developments. There were like a lot of these in Dr. Zhivago, which I'm also due to reread. A constant parade of spoilers, the book thief, Gossip Girl in period clothes, anachronisms to try to make historical people seem like they're from the modern era, which is really stupid. If you're going to give us something that was unusual but not necessarily completely impossible, like, for example, an 18th century woman who wants to become a doctor, or a 12-year-old surviving Auschwitz, like, give us a reason to go along with it and make it clear this wasn't like a common occurrence, like have other people reacting to it as unusual. Don't just like throw it at us and have everyone around them taking it, oh, this is just happening, it's totally normal. Another one I don't like is predated naming trends. I'm a name nerd. My secondary blog is all about names. Like, for example, there are plenty of names that are common now or only became trendy fairly recently that are a lot older. Like, for example, I'm Jennifer, Jessica, Amanda, Nicole, like Tiffany. But if you're like having like every single character, like almost every single character in a historical have a name that only became really, really popular in the modern era, that's like total crap. Like, I'm going to call BS on, I could say, an 18th century woman named Madison, or a boy born in the 1950s named Jaden. It's just like kind of stupid. Look outside of the current top 100, actually. Look at what names were popular and common in that era, and if there is an unusual name, give us a reason to go along with it. Don't just like make it like it's, oh, this was totally normal and historically accurate. I also dislike books that slog along and feel much longer than they actually are. Books that are little more than constant telling instead of showing. This happened, then that happened. Name said this, name did that. Over the summer, these events happened. Flashback with even more telling. Stilted, info-dumpy dialogue. I also dislike books written with hate, anger, and or a one-sided bias. One that immediately springs to mind is Evelyn Kay's The Hole in the Sheet, which is one long rant and slander against the entire Orthodox Jewish world. While there are legitimate issues in the more extreme parts of the Orthodox community, they do not represent the majority even within those groups. And I wish more films and TV shows would actually depict this beauty in the Orthodox world, not just have it, oh, everyone is just like totally secular and assimilated, or it's this poor, oppressed woman who has to leave this like cult-like group that's just completely offensive and insulting. Evelyn Kay, who wrote that terrible book, is a member of the so-called Asa tribe, people who are completely secular and assimilated and only have anything to do with their Jewish heritage when they speak with pretended authority as a Jew to bash, misrepresent, and lie about very important things like in our theology and history, like, for example, our indigenous connection to the land of Israel, the importance of kosher and circumcising boys at 8 days old unless there's, God forbid, a medical contraindication, and just really important things like that. And then anti-Semites point to these useful tokens. Oh, see, oh, this person likes eating, ham and lobster and married a non-Jew and puts up a Christmas tree and thinks circumcision is barbaric. You should think like that too. It's unfortunate. And also, very similar are books written by the like so-called new atheists who actively bash religious people and religion instead of respectfully making their point and agreeing to disagree. Though I do have a lot of admiration for Richard Dawkins because he's recently thrown his hat in with like the movement for like protecting women's sex-based rights against the dangerous concept of self-identification, but that's a whole topic for another post. Speaking as an indie author, it really annoys me when other writers in our community publish unpolished books, even first drafts, that didn't have a bit of proofreading or editing. Indie publishing has come so far over the last decade, and clowns like that make everyone look bad and keep alive dated, hurtful stereotypes. Most of us these days spend a lot of time and love making our books as perfect and polished as possible. And many indie authors use professional editors and cover artists, and some indie authors even use professional formatters, so they're not like doing all of this like work by themselves. They're actually hiring good professionals to help them. It's embarrassing to see indie books with lots of typos, confused homophones, like words that sound the same but have different spellings, like, for example, H-E-A-L instead of H-E-E-L. I mean, who was like doing the editing and proofreading if that got through? And improper formatting. You should not be doing any kind of like publishing or querying anybody. If If you don't know, a manuscript should have justified margins, auto hyphenation, 1 point leading, which is the space between the lines, and the kerning also figures into that. It shouldn't be, too like loose or tight either, but sometimes you do have to tighten it up a little for the justified margins and auto hyphenation, not to create huge gaps. Indents about 1/3 of an inch. They used to be a bit bigger in the past than the days of typewriters, but now they're a little bit tighter so they can conserve space and still look readable. Headers and footers should have the page numbers on different sides depending on if it's a left or right page. On the page 1 and all odd numbered pages are always going to be right hand pages, and pages with even numbers like 2, 4, etc. are always going to be left handed pages, and always it varies if you're putting the header, the book page, and the title at the top or the bottom, but they should always be facing different ways. You should know about basics of formatting before you even start your indie publishing journey. And comfortable margins. You don't want to have words practically falling into the gutter, and they don't want to be too wide either, but I can also do another vlog about that. I spent many hours editing a guidebook about eBay selling for my now ex, who is an ex for many, many reasons, and I later discovered he published the original Hot Mess. Sergey claimed he didn't remember me editing, and that he couldn't find the file with all my edits on his computer. He only changed the awful cover image, and claimed people who are interested in the topic won't care about his trademark run-on sentences, awful grammar, bad punctuation, misspellings, and other mangling of the English language. No, normal people will navigate off the page when they see all that terrible writing in the preview. He said he'd pay me to edit all over again, and I refused. I think it was like lowball amount, like $20. I did more than enough thankless grunt work for him, like writing short essays on his job applications, editing his resume and curriculum vitae, editing his cover letters, doing almost all of his work behind the scenes when he was teaching at a high school for emotionally disturbed boys. And to be fair, his first language is Russian, and he also spoke Hebrew. He lived in Israel for many years, but he's unfortunately very secular, not religious at all. But this is why you particularly need an editor when you're writing in English and that's not your first language. These people can, help you write better. It's not just like, oh, no one will care if I do run-on sentences. Yes, everyone does notice that, and they think it makes you look bad. I've noticed an unfortunate number of badly edited, traditionally published books as well in recent years. Far from the only one who wonders if publishing houses still employ editors and fact-checkers, or if books are given the green light after a quick, superficial reading. A few typos can happen to even the most carefully edited book that has multiple eyes on it, as embarrassing as they are to discover. But when you find them over and over again, it's obvious there was little to no proper editing. It's like the editors assume the writer must have done her or his research and done many edits before finding an agent, and they expect them to do everything for them. Like I wouldn't say most people, but I have encountered a number of people in the writing groups I've been in, particularly since I moved out of Albany. They say, oh, I don't care about like punctuation and grammar and spelling. My editor will take care of that when I find an agent. No, if you do not have technical grasp of the writing from the jump, you are not going to get an agent. You're going to get a form rejection letter. And it's one thing if you already are working with a professional editor and you just say, oh, just critique the big picture because my editor will handle this later. But if you don't have like technical things down pat, how do you expect to get in the door? That's just kind of like silly. I see a lot of this in historical fiction, like the Gossip Girl and period clothes books I loathe so much, which basically history is just shallow, fluffy window dressing instead of an integral part of the plot and character development. It's particularly obvious when these writers aren't passionate lovers of the genre or particular setting or era, but only chose it to try something newer because it was trendy. As a Russophile, it really annoys me when these people, who many times only care about Nicholas II's immediate family and admit they're not interested in any other Romanovs or other eras of Russian history, use male surnames on female characters like that. How did you not know that? Russian is a language where surnames have grammatical gender. Polish is the same way, and Czech is also in Latvian. The surnames differ if you're a man, an unmarried woman, or a married woman, and I think a few other languages also have grammatical gender with surnames. I'm really embarrassed for the writer who used a female Polish surname for a real-life male character, because apparently she was only familiar with his infamous sister's birth name and assumed that was the only form of the name. And she also admitted in her author's note at the end she wished 1,000 times she'd been writing about barbed wire instead, and she thinks the Russian names are damnably confusing and sound all the same, so she made up nicknames for real-life characters and combined others because, oh, God forbid, real characters have like multiple of the same name. Just Start writing about something else. No one will force you to write that book. Number 50. How do you feel about not finishing a book? When you're not clicking with a book, you shouldn't feel ashamed of returning it to the library unfinished, or having to skim the rest and read reviews if you're supposed to be reading it for something like a class or book club. You gave it a fair try, discovered it's not your style. It's radically different than you were led to believe, or it's too boring to want to finish. Perhaps one day in future you'll return to the book and like it a lot more. Sometimes we're just not ready for a certain book at that time in our life, just as sometimes books we loved when we were younger seem terrible upon a later rereading. Number 16. Should the author's personal life matter at all? Like the rap critic, one of my favorite YouTubers, says, there are times when knowing about the artist's personal life enhances your understanding and enjoyment of a song, but you shouldn't need to know about it to like and comprehend the song. The same way with books. For example, many of Hermann Hesse's books are strongly based on his own life and are influenced by his spiritual interests and beliefs, but I love them regardless of how many details I know about his personal background. Stories and characters stand on their own. I don't hold writers to woke purity tests and gleefully rush to cancel them because they dare to go against the most updated woke checklist of what's considered problematic. Particularly ridiculous when they rant against writers who lived in bygone eras and thus held views entirely consistent with that milieu. One day our distant descendants will judge us the same way wokesters judged people born before 1980, and obviously this is a whole subject for several other vlogs. Number 17. If you could only read one genre for the rest of your life, what would it be? I would probably have to go with classic world literature, since they're de facto historical novels, and also include some classic older sci-fi books, and they're also very well written. A lot of books these days, as I've mentioned, aren't as well written as they used to be. Being older books are also frequently much longer than modern books. When they are shorter, it's because the story naturally calls for that length instead of being short just to stick to some arbitrarily decided word count. And I kind of almost want to laugh when I see like historicals these days described as a sweeping saga and it's all of 300 pages long. Like, that's not a saga, that's a very, very short book. That's a totally inaccurate description. And just a saga to me is at least 600 pages or so. 120,000 words is the bare minimum for historical, which I think is maybe 400 or so pages, and even that's not saga length, that's just bare minimum. In terms of nonfiction, I would go with history books, including biographies. Number 18. Do you ever read a book without knowing anything about it? There have been times I picked up a book from the library because it just looked interesting. It was in a section I was already browsing. It was close to books by an author I was looking for. This was also how I discovered Hermann Hesse at age 14, when I saw Damien among my father's old books in our rooms, and unfortunately all my Hesse books and almost all my other books are in storage 900 miles away because my brother has been caring more about his girlfriend and her husband than his own family, which is very unfortunate. He didn't ship my books down, but I have to have some friends help me with that. Number 19. What author, genre, series, or culture can you just not get into, and why? I can't see myself ever getting to epic high fantasy. Fantasy isn't my genre anyway, but I do enjoy historical fantasy, urban fantasy, magical realism, and ghost stories every so often, but they're not things I specifically go out of my way to look for. I also cannot get into the vast majority of YA that's been published since the giant explosion in the late 90s. My YA literature professor was rather frustrated by how I expressed my dislike for most of the books in my papers. The only books I liked, out of the required books, the books we chose from a list in each genre, were the graphic novels, novels in verse, and the urban contemporary books by the wonderful Walter Dean Myers, whom I would highly, highly recommend. He was a wonderful writer. I also liked most of the books I chose for my final paper and presentation, which were memoirs and historical fiction about the Shoah. But the majority of the books weren't written very well, had characters I couldn't like, were full of ridiculous events and storylines, had plot holes and storylines that were just dropped and never mentioned again, and weren't very deep or complex. When I called out a historical about a Japanese-American soldier during World War II, I believe it's called The Eyes of the Emperor, for this Shaolinish, rushed plot, and chapters and sentences that were too short. The professor asked me to think about the kinds of books I read as a teen. I said I was reading adult literature by that age. I always read like 4 or 5 or so grade levels above myself, and I never liked overly short and simplistic books. A reluctant reader I've never been, and it's insulting to treat all teens like they won't want to read anything unless the paragraphs are all of 2 lines long and many sentences are only a few words long. A lot of current YA just seems so shallow, and my eyes glaze over when I see first-person present tense. So many young and or new writers seem to choose that tense and point of view because it's all they've seen modeled. Some even admit they think the classic default of third-person past tense is outdated and boring. In fact, seeing first-person present tense print makes me angry 99% of the time. It's like, I do this, I do that, I say this, I say that, I. It's when you're writing first person, it needs to like kind of blend into the background, not really paying attention, not beginning every single sentence with I, and it's just something you choose because it naturally works with the story. That my current book that I'm writing, my alternative Circle about Dante and Beatrice, it was a giant shock when first person revealed itself as the only perfect tense. I had always thought I would do this in the classic third person omniscient, but when your characters tell you to do something, you listen to them, particularly if they were real people. But first person present tense does work perfectly for me in Showa memoirs, stream of consciousness stories, books about subjects like depression and bullying, and books narrated by very young children. Everything else, it annoys me. It makes it almost impossible to read and get lost in this story. I've like DNF'd a lot of first person present tense. Even third person present tense, which I made the carefully considered decision to use in some of my own books, needs to be chosen because it genuinely works with this story. Too many modern writers don't understand the importance of mastering the classic defaults of third person and past tense before trying something new. You need to have a compelling reason why that particular story absolutely needs to be told in present tense and or first person, and why it wouldn't work or feel right any other way. When done well, it seamlessly blends into the story instead of constantly calling attention to itself. One of the greatest writing compliments I ever got was from a blogging friend who said she hadn't noticed I was using present tense until she read a very dramatic, intense scene. One of the worst books I read in that class was Andy Mulligan's Trash, which took the alternating narratives trend to the most ridiculous extreme. It hopped around between 8 narrators, including one who only appeared once. My name is Grace, and you will only hear one thing from me. Why are you in this book? Some of the later chapters bopped around among 3 or 4 narrators. They frequently started with silly identifications and handoffs. This is Rad again. I'm handing it over to Gardo now. Time to talk with Raphael. Still Olivia. Can you imagine how ridiculous it would be for a classic novel with an ensemble cast to do that? God forbid you use third-person omniscient when you have multiple protagonists. As I've discussed prior, I don't understand this trend of adults proudly saying they only read YA or barely read anything else. There's something wrong with an adult who relates more to stories about high school kids than same-age peers. I mean, I hate to stereotype my own sex, but it does seem like this is mostly women doing this, particularly the things I'm about to discuss, and when they have crushes on fictional teen boys and they feel fluttery over teenagers kissing in makeout scenes. That's just kind of gross and creepy. I won't even write a sex scene with people who are under the age of 18 because that's just a line I won't cross, or if I do, it's like, very gentle and vague and sweet, not all and out graphic, because that's just like something kind of creepy. Adults shouldn't be like reading and writing about things with minors. YA Twitter is also a legendary dumpster fire. Number 20. Do you think everyone should read? Why? I think it's very important for everyone to have access to educational literacy. But as aforementioned, many people unfortunately haven't the class or geographical privilege to do that. However, they can still take part in an oral tradition or be intelligent in other ways. If you've watched to the end, thank you very much. This turned out much longer than I thought it would be. My next vlog will be on December 8th. I'll be speaking about John Lennon's 44th death anniversary, and I think my next booktube post will be on the Monday following, December 3rd. I'll be doing a blog post of one of my blogs about Empyrean, which is like the medieval conception of the heavens and the last 4 cantos of Divine Comedy. And I just got this beautiful book from Peter Popper Press, which kind of illustrates the medieval conception of like the universe and Empyrean and things like that. So I'm looking forward to that. I'll see you guys very soon. Thanks. Bye.